Hello and welcome to episode 112 of Page 1, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco, and once again I'm not joined by Tarek for this introduction, but I'm pleased to say he has recovered from COVID. That's not the reason that he's absent from this introduction. He is in fact in London at the CWA Daggers Awards, where of course his debut novel Welcome to Cooper has been nominated for Debut of the Year, which was very exciting. Unfortunately, he didn't win. Janice Hallett won for The Appeal, but I know Tarek had a great time, and obviously it's a brilliant achievement even getting onto that shortlist. So I'm sure he'll tell us about it in a future episode. But anyway, enough about Tarek, and thanks for joining us on Page 1, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, hear how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've had some really brilliant guests over the past 111 episodes. Just this season we've spoken with Hollywood screenwriter and director Nicholas Mayer, author Rob Hart, Sam Holland, Jane Schemmel, Ed MacDonald. Going further back, we've spoken to people like Ian Rankin, Nick Hornby, David Nichols, Sarah Pimbra. So there's a whole great array of authors, screenwriters, journalists, comedians, video game writers. So please do check out the back catalogue if you haven't done that before. But this week we have another brilliant guest on the podcast. We're speaking with sci-fi and fantasy author Martha Wells, whose first book came out in 1993, but since then she's worked on her own fantasy series, and most recently and most famously perhaps the Murderbot Diaries, which have been a smash hit, and as we'll hear in the podcast, actually rescued her from what was a bit of a lull in her career. And it's really interesting hearing what Martha has to say about that, because often I'm sure when authors get published, they think, that's it, I'm published now this should get easier as you go on, but it definitely doesn't. And even someone as successful as Martha was can have this sort of dip in her career. And as she says to us, she was almost going to give up her own writing, but then fortunately she didn't. She wrote the Murderbot Diaries, which then have gone on to become a phenomenal success, even being made into a TV series soon, and we speak to her about that as well. So it's a really great episode. So I'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then I'll be back at the end of the podcast just to let you know about next week's guest.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page 1. Page 1 is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page 1.
So I always start these podcasts with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer?
I think I did. I can't really remember a time when I didn't. I was really into science fiction and fantasy really early on. That was back when we didn't have cable TV or anything. We had 5 broadcast channels, and one of them was an independent that showed like Godzilla movies and monster movies and things like Lost in Space and Land of the Giants. And I was always trying to make my own stories to go with those things. It's like really early proto fan fiction or something. And I just remember, I think the thing that probably really got me wanting to be a writer is my mother really liked the Irma Bombeck books. And she was a columnist in the newspaper. And she wrote about, it was a humor column about her family and kind of living in suburbia and all this kind of stuff. But she wrote a lot about being a writer. And that was kind of and I read those books really early. And those were kind of my earliest notion that, writers were real people, and being a writer was a job that you could do, and a job that a woman could do. So I really always, I know when I was in high school and before I went to college, I wanted to be a fiction writer, though I had absolutely zero idea how to go about that at that point.
And did you, so how did you go about it? How did you take those first steps into it?
I actually chose Texas A&M University because they had a science fiction and fantasy student committee that put on conventions. And I knew I wanted to be involved in fandom because I'd been reading Starlog magazine. And at that time, they did kind of movie and media reporting, but they also did book reviews, and they talked a lot about fandom activities and conventions and things. So when I knew I wanted to be involved in that. And when I went to A&M and I joined it was called Cepheid Variable, the Science Fiction Fantasy Committee. And I think in the first semester I was there, Stephen Gould, who lived in College Station, did a science fiction writers workshop through what they called at the time the Free University. And it was kind of a community education thing that the university did. I don't think they do it anything like that anymore, but there was all these classes like different languages and bartending and astronomy and writing and all these other kinds of things that they would do for just anybody. You didn't have to be enrolled to do them. Anybody could sign up for them. And he did a writing workshop. And so that's how I met him. And I did my first story at that workshop. And that kind of really set me off into then going to conventions and finding out a lot more about how publishing worked and how agents worked and how you set about trying to be published.
It's funny, we've chatted to quite a few folk and a lot of them have had some kind of writing training, whether it's doing a course or like a formal training or just going to a writing class or a workshop or a writers group, and some people have done none of that. And in your view, what is it something that you would recommend people do if they're aspiring writers wanting to start out there? Is it a good thing? Obviously you find it very helpful, and is it something you would recommend that other people try?
I took one formal class at the university in creative writing, and it was really geared toward literary writing. The professor was not interested in the fantasy story I wrote, and there was really no information, no kind of concept of genre being a legitimate thing to do at all there. Yeah. So it was really not. I mean, it really wasn't that helpful. The literature classes I took were a lot more helpful. Mm-hmm. I think it's different though. There are some universities now where their creative writing course actually has someone who's a science fiction fantasy writer as attached to it as a professor to teach. And I think if you have the opportunity to do something like that, that would probably be helpful. But for me, the genre workshops, I took workshops from Stephen Gould, from Rory Harper. There were workshops in Austin and Houston that I went to. I went to the Turkey City workshop taught by Bruce Sterling, and that was really helpful. I didn't do Clarion. I would never have had time or money to do Clarion or anything like that. But that was about all I did. I think it's really an individual thing, because I know I have friends who are writers who tried to do workshops and just had a bad experience from the get-go, and it was never helpful for them. So it's really such an individual thing. And I know a lot of people really like the writing manuals, kind of the how-to books, and they get a lot out of that. But I've never read one. That never really appealed to me at all. So it's a really individual process, I think.
And did these workshops, presumably, were you getting feedback on your own writing and things like that at that? And did that help in terms of, honing your own craft?
Yeah, you usually you're getting feedback on your story, and then you're critiquing the other people's stories in your group, and they're critiquing it. So it really does teach you about how to interpret criticism. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people go in and they've never had much experience with that, and it helps to know that when people have a problem with something in the story, they don't think it's working right, they don't understand it. Oftentimes, the problem in the story is not there. The problem is earlier, when it was set up. And I think until you get the experience of hearing people criticize your story, or give you comments, and then trying to figure out what they mean by those comments and where they got that idea, and just learning how to interpret it. Because sometimes people they know something's wrong, but they can't tell you what it is, or they try to tell you what it is, and it's not. That's not it. Mm-hmm. And also, I actually like writing workshops where people give you suggestions for the story or the novel or whatever the project that's in progress, and because I think those suggestions are almost as helpful as any other kind of criticism, because they tell you what people are expecting from it, where people think the story is going. And that can be really valuable, because it can tell you, you've really given your reader the wrong idea about what's going to happen in this book. Or is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that a nice red herring, or is that just people are coming up with expectations and are going to be disappointed because the story is going in a different direction? I think that's really helpful. I know some workshops really don't like that, but I don't know. I feel it would be difficult for me to critique a story without telling, or a story that was in progress, without telling the person where I thought they were going with it.
Yeah, no, I think that is a massively valuable thing, actually. I've experienced that myself. And yeah, sometimes you give something and you think it's obvious where you're trying to point them, and they come back with something entirely different.
Yeah, and it really is not.
Yeah. And obviously that all those workshops and stuff led to your first published book, The Element of Fire, in 1993. How did that come about? Did you find an agent, or was it direct to a publisher? What was the path there?
I found an agent, and actually Stephen Gould I think he had moved to New York at that point, and he was writing his first novel, Jumper, and he got an inquiry from an agent who'd read his short fiction and wanted to ask if he was looking for a representation for a novel or anything. And he wasn't at that time, and he passed the agent along to me. And he ended up reading the partial I had at that point of The Element of Fire, and asked to see the whole book when it was done. And then when it was finished, he agreed to represent me. And he sent it first to, I think it was either Bantam or Ballantine, and it was turned down. And then it was sent to Tor, and it was accepted, which was a huge shock for me. It's always a huge moment when you sell your first book. And and at that time I was probably 25 or 26. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly anymore. And I had no idea what I was doing as a published writer. I just had I knew how to get to that point, but that's all I'd been focusing on. I didn't really know very much about the publishing process. And so the whole thing was a huge learning experience.
And was The Element of Fire the first book that you tried to write, or had you had some false starts, or was that the kind of your first book that you kind of really felt that you wanted to write?
That was the first book I wrote. I'd done some short stories and I'd written fan fiction for Star Wars, like a lot of women my age at that time. A lot of people my age, actually. And that was, but I was in a local writing workshop with Stephen Gould and Laura Mixon and some other people at that time. And we met every month, and I did a chapter a month. And that's how I wrote the book.
And obviously that was the first book in the series. Sorry, how do you say the series? I'm not sure how you pronounce
Ile-Rien.
Ile-Rien, yeah. And which obviously went on to success, but there was a period, I think, where you suffered a lull in your career. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, that was around 2006 when that started. Basically, I was at tour for the first two books, and then moved to Avon Eos for The Death of the Necromancer, and did really well with Death of the Necromancer. But then HarperCollins discontinued their science fiction and fantasy line and bought Eos, and then kind of changed everything about Eos that was working really well. And so I'd sold Avon Eos the Ile-Rien trilogy at that point. And Wheel of the Infinite was the other standalone fantasy, and it didn't do very well. And then the trilogy, they just kind of, by the third book, the sales had really dropped off dramatically. And there were people who I'm not even quite sure how they released it, because there were people who had the second book and didn't know there was a first book. Mm-hmm. And there were people who never found the third book until much later, basically. Yeah. So it was not released well. And and it was just really weird. In 2006, I think I had more things coming out that year than I ever had before, but that was basically the end of the first part of my career, because the publisher dropped me. And a friend of mine described it as, basically, it's like you've been fired from your job, but they don't tell you. So you keep coming into work and gradually you realize, they aren't paying you and no one wants you there, and that kind of thing. And you kind of have to take yourself off on your own. So and that was when I tried to start several different novels, and I'd never had novels die on the vine like that before. And I probably had 10 books die on the vine that I was working on. And I was selling some short stories to Black Gate at that point, but then I just hit a period where around, I guess it was 2008, I couldn't sell anything. Everything I sent out just came back, and even short fiction. And I've never been much of a short fiction writer. I'm really better at longer lengths. And then I changed to a different agent. I was able to get a different agent, which a whole saga in itself. Yeah. But I started writing the Cloud Roads, and I'd done 2 Stargate Atlantis tie-ins, and I think that was helpful to me, because it kind of got me out of the mindset of the kind of fantasy I was doing, which was trying to be very, even though it was secondary world fantasy, trying to be very historically accurate and all this kind of stuff to the periods that I was trying to duplicate, and into just doing something new. And then I started the Cloud Roads and finished it, and my agent was sending it around, and it literally made the rounds of probably, I don't know how many publishers, at least 7 or 8, 10, something like that. It took about 2 years, and that was constantly, my agent was constantly sending it out every time it came back. And I wrote The Serpent Sea, and I wrote the first young adult book I tried, Emily in the Hollow World. And after that point, I was really getting ready to shut my career down. And I had been accepting invitations to the local conventions that I usually went to, like Armadillo Con and Con DFW and all that. And I was basically getting ready to write and say, no, I'm not coming as a pro anymore, and basically look for another job. I'd had an IT job up until around, I guess it was 2006. And I'd been trying to write full time after that, but yeah, it was obviously not working out. And then my agent called me, and Nightshade had offered for the Cloud Roads and the second book, The Serpent Sea. And so that kind of started everything on. And it was really like starting over from the beginning, because I'd only been gone like 2 or 3 years, and nobody had heard of me. It was just like I disappeared from the earth. So it was interesting.
And how did you, obviously the goal of any aspiring writer is to get picked up, is to get the publishing deal and all that. And I suppose there's a sort of thought that once you're on that track, then you continue down it quite happily. I mean, how did you ever suffer a motivation? Why am I writing this? If at that period of time, was it difficult to continue writing at that point?
Sometimes it was, but it was like, it's the only thing I've ever really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to keep doing it. If I hadn't been able to sell the Cloud Roads, I probably would have stopped doing original fiction so much. I probably would have just written for myself or written fan fiction, but I would have kept writing, even though I really enjoy my original fiction. But yeah, not having that motivation that, to be published, I'm not sure how much longer I would have continued with original fiction.
And when it seems that you made a lot of brave choices during that phase, in terms of kickstarting everything going again, changing agent, working out what stuff you wanted to write about. And changing agents is quite a brave thing to do, especially, I think there's that kind of feeling of a lot of people have, which is it's so hard to try and get one. When you've got one, you don't want to go back to step one again. But that was quite a bold step. And was that a hard thing to do, and to reach the decision that that's what you had to do?
I think I actually waited too late. I've waited too long to do it, because I think my first agent, I think he kind of lost interest in me when things stopped working out, and he wasn't engaged with my work. And there were a lot of signs that I kind of put up with that I should have probably acted before then. But I was again, as you say, it's very frightening thing to do, and it's but I finally just kind of hit the realization of this is not working out. And I talked to a friend of mine, Roxanne Conrad, who she's passed away a few years ago, but she wrote as Rachel Kane, and she started, I think, about the same time as I did, or a little bit before, and she'd had 3 career crashes up to this point, I think Rachel Kane was her 3rd different name that she was using, and she'd gotten through every one. So I talked to her, and she was like, yes, you need a new agent. She gave me some recommendations. And I think I'd been trying to switch agents by that point, and I'd actually submitted a partial of the Cloud Roads to an agent that had actually talked to me when I think Death of the Necromancer came out, asking if I ever wanted to change representation or whatever, had basically contacted me. And he was from a fairly big agency, and apparently I waited, and I got a good response from one of the agents below him, and then waited, and after I wrote her back, and then never heard anything. And basically, when I finally wrote back again, I got a reply from an assistant that basically said, well, we're only interested in established writers. And he thought I had like cold submitted this partial without, and I guess the letter I had written to send with it had been lost or separated from the rest of the work. And the agent that I'd been talking to had left the agency, and maybe because the assistants were so mean and incompetent, who knew? Maybe that's why. But so that was really disappointing. And so that's when I talked to Roxanne, and she was like, no, you need to do this. And she gave me the names of 2 agents, and I submitted something to the first one, and she said she didn't think we'd be compatible. It wasn't quite what she liked to what she liked to represent. And then the second one was Jennifer Jackson, who's my agent now. And she'd actually read The Death of the Necromancer and knew who I was. So that was nice. And and we've been together since then.
Yeah, and fortunately for all of us that happened, and obviously the series of the books of Raksura then came out successfully at that point, and more recently the Murderbot Diaries as well have made you really well known, I think. Again, how did you obviously you'd started out in fantasy writing and moved into the sci-fi world as well. I know you had an interest in both, but what was it that made you, with the Murderbot Diaries, made you want to write in that world?
Well, when I came up with the idea for the story, I was actually, for All Systems Red, I was finishing up the first draft of The Harbors of the Sun, and I was having a lot of different ideas for all kinds of stuff. And I got the idea, basically the basic idea for All Systems Red, and I realized it's a science fiction idea. There's no way I could make it a fantasy story, but I would have to hand wave so much stuff. It just didn't feel it felt like it would be so awkward. It was obviously a science fiction story. And so I was still working on this novel, and I'm just going to write this idea down so I don't forget it. And then I ended up writing like 5 pages just like that of the scene where Mensa knocks on the cubicle wall and talks to Murderbot, and the whole thing kind of built around that. The day I finished what I thought was the complete draft of The Harbors of the Sun, but I ended up realizing it was not right, and I had to email the editor and tell him, no, I'm going to submit another draft. And I added like 100 pages and made the book much better, I thought. But the next day I started All Systems Red, and I'm usually not a fast writer, so it was really kind of wild for the story to come together so quickly and to have, a 33,000 word novella within like less than a month. So I think it was just, I'd been reading things like Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, that trilogy, and some other things. And I think it just all kind of came together, just years of reading and watching science fiction, then this came out of it.
And when you come down to, it sounds like the first book was a kind of, as you say, almost like you've been waiting for this story, and it kind of spilled out of you in one go. And then after that, and looking at your books, I know you have a degree in anthropology, and I'm assuming that kind of plays into your love of kind of building these big worlds, whether it's a fantasy world or a sci-fi world. And does that extend to planning the books themselves, like in terms of the plotting? Do you sit down, do you plan out the world, the characters, the story, or do you kind of just write and see where it takes you?
I used to do a lot of planning the world, a lot of coming up with like basically the settings and kind of material culture and all that kind of thing for my first few books. And then with the Cloud Roads, that's one thing I did differently. It's like, I've got this, it's more a vibe than anything else. And I'm just going to write to that and see what happens. And that was also one way of kind of getting the fun back into it for me. So that's kind of what I've been doing since then. I do think all the working on world building for the first few books did basically teach me a lot of things about it. I probably wouldn't be able to do it now more easily if I hadn't gone through all that work and kind of research and prep for those first few books. I don't tend to plan out the plot in advance. Someone online called it being a discovery writer, which sounds better than being a pantser, because you're discovering the story at the same time as the reader. And actually, I've talked to I had a friend who was a mystery writer, who said he did the same thing, because basically the audience can't figure out who the murderer is if you don't know yet. So I've always really
quite like that. That's quite a good way of thinking of it.
Yeah, it's hard to telegraph things when you don't know what they are. So I've always kind of done that. And what it means is basically I do a lot of revision as I go along. I know there's been things that says, oh no, just finish the first draft, don't ever look back. And it's like, I have to, or I forget what I'm doing. So I go, if I change my mind about something, or I realize something needs to be fixed in the plot, I'll go back and I'll rewrite at that moment. And it takes me longer to get the first draft, but then the first draft is a lot further along than it would be if I just like kind of, tried to barrel through and then ended up with, a book where, it was really had gone off the rails at several points and I just kind of ignored it and kept going. So that's always worked for me. And I know some people just really, outlining and all other stuff is just the only way that they can do it, and it really works for them. But I've always just kind of gone off and just done it.
The Murderbot Diaries in particular read they're a lot of fun to read, and it strikes me as they'd be a lot of fun to write as well, because obviously they're shorter, they're novellas, but yeah, there's a lot packed into them, happening at quite a quick pace, and it seems like quite a lot of fun to write. Do you enjoy working in that slightly shorter form than the full sort of novel length?
Yeah, I did. I'd written some. I think 4 novellas for the Raksura series that take place kind of in and around the series. So I'd done that form before. The first All Systems Red was a lot of fun to write. The others, they're fun when they work, when I finally get them going. The others have all taken about 3 to 4 months to write, because a lot of times they're kind of logistically complicated, even though the plot's not terribly complicated. So it'll take me, I'll write like sometimes 5,000 words, sometimes as much as 20,000 words, and then realize a lot of it has to go back and start at the beginning again. For example, Artificial Condition, in the first few versions of the beginning, Art wasn't even a character. Art was just like a couple of lines of something that happened to Murderbot on the way to this space station. And then I realized that the problem was I was starting in the wrong place of the story, and I needed to go back. And also, I needed to show the incident Murderbot talks about is where this transport ship helped it change its appearance with the medical setup. And as soon as Murderbot and Art started to talk, and it's just this character came in, and it was like, yeah, this is the core of the story, is the relationship between these two characters. And each book, each novella has been like that. It takes like usually at least 3 months for me to really get to the core of the story and figure it out. And part of that is the fight scenes are often so difficult because Murderbot has all these abilities that I've given it, and now I have to take those into account whenever there's an action scene. And so I kind of have to do them in layers, and it's kind of like, this is what I want to happen. But Murderbot is going to be able to do this, so I had to add that in, and it's going to be able to do this, so I have to add this in. So they're very complicated. Network Effect was, I was also writing Magic Story for Magic the Gathering for the first 3 months when I'd started Network Effects. So that's one reason why it was slow. And the other is it took me probably a year to do the first 50,000 words. And it was just starting in the wrong place, starting on the wrong planet, starting over and over again. And then finally once I finally got going on it, then it was the second half of it, which went much quicker. But yeah.
I know you said that you discover write these ones now, but do you have, if not an arc for Murderbot, but do you have some ideas for the future that you want to seed in any of these?
Yeah, the first arc was the first 4 novellas, and when I wrote All Systems Red, I thought that was going to be it. That was going to be the only one. And then when they bought it, they asked for a second novella. It didn't have to be Murderbot; it could be something else. And that's when I decided, well, I really like this character. I want to keep going, and I wrote Artificial Condition. And then by the end of Artificial Condition, I thought, what I want to do is get Murderbot back to Mensa, but now as a more independent figure where they can have an equal relationship. If it had stayed with her at the end of All Systems Red, it would have just been like trading up to a nicer captor. It would not have been, it would not have developed the way it did. But I did want it to come back, and I had the idea of it coming back and rescuing her. And so that's why I was working through Rogue Protocol, and then finally getting to Exit Strategy. And after that, I thought it was going to be it, and then thought about it. And it's like, I really wanted to get art back in the story. And I think the publisher kind of wanted a novel at that point. So that would be a good place to do it and I figured out a way to basically the germ of the idea of Art having to come to ask Murderbot for help. And then, so that was Network Effect. And then for Fugitive Telemetry, it's actually set before Network Effect, because I was trying to start basically a sequel to Network Effect in novella form, and it just wasn't working. And so, but I had the idea, I'd mentioned this, there's a bit in Network Effect where Murderbot refers to working with the Preservation Station Security and describes a little bit of that. And I thought that's kind of a journey from how it would get to sort of semi-trusting these people and working with them. So that's what I wanted to write. So that became Fugitive Telemetry. And so now I've gone back and I'm working on the next Murderbot novella, which is set after Network Effect. And I tried several times to get it started it was like right when the pandemic started. And I beat my head against the wall on this for, I think, probably 3 or 4 months, and it just wasn't coming together. And that's when I stopped and I wrote a fantasy novel called Witch King, which is coming out next May in 2023. And then I tentatively went back to the Murderbot novella and was really shocked when I actually started to be able to work on it. So whatever my problem was with it, I somehow got it out of my system, but I think I was still just in a mindset where this story is not going to work. Nothing I do to it will help. And so having that break really did help me continue with it.
Yeah, it's funny. We've spoken to some other authors that have, ongoing series, but they say that, writing a standalone in a, completely unrelated standalone can sometimes really just help when they go back to the series. It's sort of a palate cleanser almost, or something that you need to break to then be able to revisit those characters.
I think it's like you wear pathways in your brain and you're thinking of things in the same way over and over again. And you really have to shock yourself out of that. And a lot of times the only time is just doing something completely different. On Project Runway, Tim Gunn would tell, who has a lot of things to say for that's really advice that's valuable for all kinds of creative people, I think, and not just fashion. But he talks about to tell when people are stuck, he says, you need to free yourself from this. And that's really what I needed to do. I just needed something completely different and not think about the novella at all until I had a chance to really kind of get my mindset out of this tracks that it was in.
I wanted to ask about the novella format, because it's a format that you don't really see that often anymore, and it's often something which people are often discouraged almost to write. But the things I always read about it is that there's no market for novellas, or people are it's either going to be a short story or a full-length novel, and there's a whole other world of average word counts that you need to hit for crime or for fantasy and sci-fi, etc. And so did you find it difficult? Well, one, why did you go down the novella route? And two, did you find it difficult to sell the novella route? Because you found great success through that, which is quite surprising.
Well, I think that was the case, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. But when ebooks came in, one of the first things because there was no market, because a print magazine is too small. They usually only want one novella, if that. It was too small for book form anymore. Though a lot of the big science fiction novels of the pulp era are novella sized or close to that. But when ebooks came in, a lot of people started writing novellas and self-publishing them. And then the online magazines that are now, they have whatever room they want, they can stick in however many novellas they want, as long as they can, pay the writer. Started to make novellas more popular. And then there's at least 3 or 4 publishers who regularly do novellas as ebook and then these small print chapbooks. And I'd been reading Tor.com's novellas. I think the first one was The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps by Kai Ashanti Wilson, which is an incredible book. And I think it was just robbed for awards because it's actually a little bit over the novella limit for both, I think both the Nebula and the Hugo. But I thought I was just blown away by that book. So I was looking, and also how beautiful their print package is. And I was looking at, I was reading their Tor novellas. And so when I was trying to write All Systems Red and realized this is going to be too long for a short story, I don't see the story going to a novel. The Tor.com novella would be perfect. And I asked my agent about it, and she said, yeah, that's a great idea. Finish it and we'll try to sell it to them. And that's what happened.
And I think I'm right in saying that you've recently signed a 6-book deal with Tor, including 3 more Murderbot books.
Yeah.
So have you got all 3 of those, the ideas for all 3 of those in your head, or just the next one?
Just the next one. Witch King is the first book in that deal, and then I'll probably do a sequel to it. That's what I'm going to try to start after this novella. And there's supposed to be at least 2 novellas, or at least 1 Murderbot novel. So that's what I'm working toward. And I've got an idea of kind of where I want to go with it, but we'll see how that develops, because I'll probably do, maybe, I'm not sure what's going to be next after I write the Witch King sequel. It may be the Murderbot novel, because I may have had it, when I finish this novella, I think I may have it developed enough to start, basically. So yeah, that's my next few years taken care of and what I'm working on.
You mentioned just there about writing for Magic the Gathering, which was something I wanted to ask you about. So for those that, because that's a card game essentially, for those that haven't played it, could you tell us a little bit about what it is and what kind of writing that you did for that?
Well, the card game is kind of, in some ways it's separate from the Magic story, because the Magic story is about the characters and the worlds that show up in the card game. And it's this epic story has been going on for a long time, starting with the first world they invented. It started in Dominaria, and then they created these different worlds. It's kind of like, they call it planeswalking, and it's kind of like transitioning from one, there are people who get the ability to transition from one world to another, and they're all fighting each other at this, or in large groups of them are fighting each other. But the section I was going to do is they were going to take the main storyline, which had been going on for quite a few years, back to Dominaria, and bring some of their original characters from that world back into this main storyline. So that's what I was going to do. And it's on the website, and actually people can just go to their website and read all the Magic story that's up there. And then there's been a few novels written, tie-in novels over the years. And I think they actually finished the storyline I was working on. I did that part of in a novel a year or 2 ago. But it was really fun to work on, because I kind of always liked working in groups and kind of coming up with ideas. So I got to work with Nick Kelman, who is my editor there, and we worked on it a lot. And there was an outline I was working from for these stories. Some parts of it were really detailed, because it had to reference all this story that they'd done before and what it was working up toward. And then some were just, okay, in this story, these 2 characters need to meet, and this thing needs to happen. And, and so I came up with the rest of it. And I got to come up with backstories for the new characters and kind of do their personalities and everything. And it was just a lot of fun. And one of the fun moments was when, towards the end, I figured out something that I needed to have happen, but it didn't sound like it was going to be possible with the way they have the Magic set up and the way things work. So I asked my editor, I want to do this, but it doesn't look like it's going to work. Is that correct? And he said, well, I asked the world building team, and the world building team came back and said, no, it won't work, but they really like that idea. So do it, and they'll figure out a way to make it make sense later. and to explain it, why this happened this one occasion. So
excellent.
I didn't realize that so many writers, folk work on the world, folk in the story. It sounds like a really kind of much more collaborative process than I actually thought it was. Yeah, that's interesting.
And you've worked on that franchise, but you've also, as you mentioned earlier, you've worked on novels for other franchises, Stargate, Star Wars, and is it good fun? Do you enjoy playing in other people's sandboxes as opposed to your own fiction? Sometimes is that another, I suppose, sort of palate cleanser type thing?
Yeah, I enjoyed the Stargate Atlantis a lot because it's a fun show to make up stuff for. And I had a lot of creative freedom and for the plot and what was going on and everything. Star Wars, I was a huge Star Wars fan starting from when I was 13 years old and the first movie came out. So I really wanted to do it and I was really excited about it, but it was just a lot harder because of there seemed to be so much more, at least at that point, there seemed to be so much more restrictions on what you could and couldn't do. And it just kind of felt like a struggle sometimes to tell the story I wanted to tell.
And you've also, you teach writing workshops as well. And I wondered if that's something which was quite important to you, because obviously you used to kind of started off almost going to these workshops and stuff. And is that something which you wanted to give back, to go full circle with almost?
Yeah, I did. And I really do enjoy teaching them. I haven't done it, because of the pandemic. I normally do the one, ArmadilloCon in Austin has a day-long writing workshop on Friday of the convention. And they usually have, around 40 or so people sign up. And usually it's 2 teachers per group of 4 or 5. But this year I've got so much going on. I didn't want to kind of do it and end up it being another source of stress because I didn't have enough time to put into the preparation for it. So I'd really like to be at a point where I could get back and to at least doing that workshop and maybe others.
Cool. And just going back to Murderbot, it's the TV rights have been sold. Are you able to update us at all on what's happening with that?
We hear things occasionally. I've read the pilot script and I really liked it. I really liked what they did with it. It's only All Systems Red. It's not any of the others yet. And all I really know is they've been working on it, and they keep getting to the point where they think they're ready to make a formal announcement about it, and then then something happens and they can't do it. So that's kind of what we're still waiting on. The last we heard is they thought things were going well, I think, and then progressing, but that's about it.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that whenever it does come out. What was the last book that you read?
The last, I can't, it was probably, I know there's been several. I'll just name several. Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that trilogy. That was just really, it felt really just innovative to me. Nevo has a new book out, Siren Queen. It just came out, I think, last Tuesday, maybe. I love that book. I loved her other work. She got a Hugo for, I think it was is either maybe The Tiger Comes Down the Mountain or The Empress of Salt and Fortune. I can't remember. She got a Hugo. I know, because I was there. I was there in Washington, D.C. when at the same time I got my 2 Hugos. I love all her work. The Chosen and the Beautiful is fabulous. I love her more secondary world fantasy, the Empress of Salt and Fortune and The Tiger Came Down the Mountain. Siren Queen is more, I think it's set in the same world as The Chosen and the Beautiful, where it's sort of, which is, that book is a retelling of The Great Gatsby, and it's the same era, but it's about pre-code Hollywood in the before 1933 or 34, when they could do whatever they wanted, and the real history of that period is really interesting, but she's done it where well, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but the magic involved is really cool, and it's just a really fabulous, fascinating book. I also like, I'm really waiting for C.L. Polk's new book to come out. I think that's later in the year. I'll probably try to get them to send me an early copy of it because I don't want to wait. And Neon Young has a new book coming out, and I got to read that early. I think it's The Genesis of Misery. That's what it's called, and that was fabulous. So yeah, I've been reading a lot more slowly just during, I don't know what it is during the pandemic. So it's just brain slowing down or something. Well, so I haven't been reading nearly as much as I normally do, but it feels like the books are the new science fiction fantasy is just getting better and better.
Yeah.
What about the last film that you watched?
Oh, the last film was Spider-Man: No Way Home.
Nice.
We've been trying not to go to theaters, even though it's very tempting, but we were finally able to rent it or buy it or something. We were able to get it on our TV. And I really enjoyed that. I'm a big Marvel fan. And I'm looking forward to the new one, the Doctor Strange one. Looking at that.
Yeah, there was a moment this is spoiler, so if you haven't seen Spider-Man, turn off your ears. There was a moment where all three of the Spider-Men land on the top of the Statue of Liberty, and I was just like, this is, 12-year-old me could never have imagined that this would be happening now.
The whole film is a kind of like a fanboy dream almost. It's like, imagine if these different studios kind of came together and these actors and, but they actually did it and they took it all the way, and it's kind of nuts that a studio did a risk almost to do something like that. I thought it was fantastic, yeah.
But yeah, it worked. I mean, there was early fangirl was screaming in my head the whole time.
And the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
The one I finished last was Moon Knight, and I really liked it. I didn't know anything about the character, but I kind of like that. I like going into something and not having any clue what's going on. And I don't particularly care if I have a clue what's going on even later too. I just like, if I'm engaged, then I'm enjoying it. Probably the others I watched The Flash. I was really disappointed when Legends of Tomorrow got canceled. I thought that was a fabulous show.
It's funny. I used to watch. I was so into the whole Arrowverse for years, and watched all of Arrow and first few seasons of Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl, Flash, and then I realized I was spending I didn't have enough time. There was like 20 series, all with like 20 episodes, and I was like, I don't have enough. I'm not just spending every spare time I've got to catch up on all these shows. It was taking over my life.
Yeah, you don't have anything. You don't have time to watch anything else.
No, exactly. I couldn't watch anything else. I had to stay on top of the Arrowverse. It was nuts. Yeah,
there's a point where it was like 2 hours a night, except for most of the week, and it's like, okay, this is getting a little much.
Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answer apart from one. So start off with Star Wars or Stargate.
Stargate.
TV. Oh, sorry. No, you can expand on it if you want.
Yeah, and TV. The Stargate TV. I like that much better than I liked the movie and then I saw the series and liked it much better. Both the Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis.
Yeah. TV or cinema?
That's a hard one, but I think TV. There's so much cool TV out now. It's in on the streaming services that the variety is incredible.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird.
Yes. Music or no music when you're writing?
I love music, but I tend not to remember to turn it on when I'm writing.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
I've been reading more ebooks lately because I thought I would always want real books, or print books, but having them on my phone, I've gotten really used to reading them on my phone, and I like to read in the bathtub, and it's a lot more convenient that way.
No chance of getting wet books and ruining pages. Exactly. No, ebook was the correct answer, and I'm very glad to find someone to back me up with ebook.
You pleased Tarek there, because a lot of people say real books, but a
lot of people are wrong, Marshall.
Well, thanks very much to Martha for coming on to the podcast. I really enjoyed that, and I know Tarek did as well. And we're both really looking forward to the Murderbot Diaries TV show when that comes out. We've put a link in the podcast description so you can pick up the Murderbot Diaries and Martha's other books. So highly recommend you do that. And looking forward to next week, we've got another great guest in the form of Chris Whitaker, author of the massive hit We Begin at the End. His debut, Tall Oaks, actually won the CWA Debut Dagger Award that Tarek was recently nominated for. And it's a really interesting chat with Chris about his career and his writing process. So I hope you're able to join us for that one. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please do give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast app. And also be sure to follow and subscribe to us on your favourite podcast app, because all of that helps us stay in the charts. And we are slowly climbing those charts, and that'll help us to continue to get great guests as well. If you want to get in touch with a question or even a comment to say how much you're enjoying the show or not, please do so, and you can do that on any of our social media, which is at UK Page One, or you can drop us an email at podcast@rightgear.co.uk. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening, and join us for the next episode.
See you later.